Hello, everyone. Welcome to the second ever ALS.COMMUNITY webinar. Today is the first episode of our Building Your Care Team series, and the topic is a general overview of caregiving. And we're very lucky today. We have two very special guests. We have Mary Paolone, who's an MSRN and the coordinator for neurodegenerative disease program at the ALS MDA Center of Hope at Temple as part of the ALS Hope Foundation, which is a great nonprofit in the Philadelphia area. If you wanted to look them up, they're at alshf.org. And our other guest is Lisa Cassidy. She is unfortunately an ALS widow. Her husband, Jim, who's a veteran, had ALS for 22 years. So she's quite experienced with ALS caregiving. And if that wasn't enough, she's also a licensed physical therapist and the owner of Empowering Care Solutions, LLC. So thank you all for joining, and I will hand it over to Mary and Lisa.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Jeff. Good morning. Yes. Wonderful. So thrilled and honored to be here. Lisa, why don't you, if you want to start with just kind of a little introduction of yourself, just so people get a sense to know, and then I'll kind of talk a little bit about the flow and whatnot.
Sure. So I've been a physical therapist since 1993, and 3 years into my marriage, my husband got ALS. So he got ALS in 98 and he passed in 20. And it was set, so arms first, then breathing, and then legs. So he was a veteran, so he was able to get veterans benefits, was on a vent. So I have experience with ventilator support, 9 years of those 22 years. I'm really passionate about caregiving because it can really make or break your life when you have this disease. And so 4 years ago, I went on a to try and find caregivers and help to network and hook people up with in need. So helping clients find private caregivers. So I've been doing it for 4 years.
And we are super honored to work with you at our center, that's for sure. So,
yeah, so I also am a consultant for ALS Hope Foundation through their Bridges program, Hope Bridges. So I go out to some home assessments, an extent of the clinic. So I get out there and actually see what's going on in homes and make recommendations for equipment and home modifications.
Great. Wonderful. Thanks so much. And everyone, super thrilled to be here. I am Mary Paolone, and have worked in the space of with ALS families and people living with ALS since 1995. Have been incredibly honored as a nurse and also a mental health professional to really help in kind of care coordination, life planning, all sorts of things along the continuum that are needed with families. So it is a real honor to be here to talk about caregiving. And so Jeff, thank you so much for having this, starting this community, and also for your journey and the service that you provided with your wife. And yeah, just really an opportunity for us to be here and talk about this really important topic. So we will be doing this is a 3-part series, and this is our first. And we do want it to be somewhat of a dialogue, and with Lisa having lived experience, we will have 2 more, and we also will most likely have people living with the disease, living with ALS, as panelists as well for those webinars. So today, Lisa and I will kind of go through, and I will be asking her some questions, certainly from her own lived experience. And we have just a couple slides just for some talking points. And what we really wanted to kind of do today is really just give an overview of caregiving. What is caregiving? What does it entail? When do we seek caregivers, different types of caregivers, and things like that, just to really start that conversation. So a couple disclaimers. that I think is important, that I certainly would like to just offer everyone, is that there are no rights or wrongs in this journey with this disease. 100%, there's no rights or wrongs. There's a different fit for everyone. There's certainly all sorts of different circumstances in terms of, family setup, financial situations, all sorts of things, medical presentations. So there's definitely no right or wrong. We will, Lisa and I, with our discussion, we hope to offer information, and we certainly will not probably touch on every circumstance that may arise. So just know that, that there's no right or wrong, and it's really what we hope to provide are resources so everyone knows where they can go for help and support. All right. So with that, Lisa, do you have any disclaimers that you'd like to offer or anything else before I jump right in to interview you?
I mean, I totally agree. It's impossible to hit on every scenario, but that's what's great about als.community is that the more people that we have that participate, the more likely you're to find somebody that may have been down a very similar path. So that's the beauty of als.community.
Lovely. All right. So Lisa, what I'd love to offer or just ask you is, just in your experience, in your own words, how would you describe caregiving?
So caregiving, especially in my situation, when I became a caregiver for my husband, it was basically taking over for his loss of function. So every time he would lose something, he would need somebody to step in, help with that function. And that's what a caregiver does. Whether it's, I can no longer button my buttons, or I can't get from point A to point B, or I can't get the words out. A caregiver is there to up the slack and help the person with those tasks.
And thank you so much for your service as well, for supporting your husband along the way. Because yes, we certainly realize that this is, in addition to all of your own, life coordination, everything that's happening in your own lives, the extra activities that you do take on are incredibly tremendous. So I am actually just going to share my screen here, just so we can kind of look at, just to have a sense of our conversation. And we'll just start with the first. Great. All right, so this, of course, yes, is, all right, so just thinking about, right, what is caregiving? So certainly, and we're not going to give everyone a ton of didactic information or educational information here. It's really just so we can have more of a discussion. So as Lisa had alluded to, it's the act of providing regular assistance to another person who, for whatever reason, cannot fully care for themselves. It may include a wide variety of tasks. So can be physical tasks, and also, as you see here, and I'm sure a lot of family members know, emotional support, household chores, transportation, financial coordination, calendar, organizing any of the medical appointments or whatever it might be. So Lisa, would you say that that's all accurate? And probably more.
Well, absolutely, that, and probably more than we can even list, but
Exactly,
that's
right.
a good description.
Yeah. So the other piece here is, one of the things that I try to do when I'm talking with families is to look out, because there is such a sense of, burden that can happen with caregiving in and of itself. And we will certainly talk more about these things at our third webinar, when we have more of kind of just a discussion model. But that, many people, one of the things that I try to ask people is, what is it that you are learning through this process? You know, many people do mention to me about the personal growth that they learn about themselves, learning new skills, greater sense of purpose. And Lisa, would you like to speak to that at all?
I mean, the list is so long, you know, what I learn. Yeah, I learned definitely there's all sorts of medical things that I had to learn, you know, getting comfortable with a ventilator. And like I was lucky because I had a medical background, you know, I'm a physical therapist. I've worked with patients on ventilators, but you know, it's a different ball game when you have somebody in your home 24/7 and you're doing that. So so many things from a medical standpoint, you know. But also, I think you really need to learn how to prioritize. I think you learn what's truly important in life. Learn patience. You learn humility. Yeah, it's a long list.
And certainly, one of the other pieces that hopefully we'll talk about, you know, in our later webinar as well is, you know, just in terms of how to support those that are caring for others, you know, how to support you during the whole process.
Mm-hmm.
So we will certainly touch on those things as well. All right, so let's just move forward here a bit. Right, just to talk about who are caregivers. So who are they? Oftentimes many times it develops as or starts as family members. Now, there are some people that may not have family members or that live alone. So certainly family, friends, neighbors, organization volunteers, you know, sometimes there are organizations or local churches or things that we may even reach out to for someone. You know, sometimes they'll start a meal train, and just this sense of caregiving too, and all the various ways that it can, you know, that somebody could potentially help, you know, even if it's not direct care. There's certainly companions. Sometimes we have people that just come and read to someone. And then there's certainly paid caregivers. So housekeepers, cleaners, home health aides, which we call custodial care. And then there's what we call skilled care. And that can be licensed practical nurses and RNs, registered nurses. So Lisa, could you describe to those watching and listening just kind of how you and your husband kind of moved through this process?
Yes. You know, he had a very slow progression. So things kind of creeped up slowly, which is very unusual. ALS, because usually it's very fast and you're going from crisis to crisis. So in our situation, we were able to kind of ease into things a little. So of course, I was always the first caregiver for him. You know, for a while, I worked full time. He went out on disability in 2003. My youngest was 1, and my oldest was 3. So, you know, I was not able to take care of our young, had to take him into daycare. So, but he was able to handle my older child. There were times when the older child could stay with him. At that point, you know, we had some weak hands, but he was still walking. So, you know, it was my point. And then we had help from family. So my sister would plan at least once a week. She would come up. Eventually, over time, like she would pick the younger one up from kindergarten and all right, what's on the list for today? What do you want to do today? And like one day he said, we're going to build shelves in the basement for storage, right? So Home Depot, he told her what 2x6s to get and what brackets, and he literally told her every detail of building shelves. One day he wanted to make tawny soup, so they went out, they got all the ingredients. He couldn't do it with his hands, but she was his hands, and that is just a great way to support somebody with ALS. My father-in-law would come once a week and just make a dinner. So again, it's just showing up and being there and what do you need? What do you need? That was awesome. Eventually, I needed some paid help. So we qualified for the independent waiver through Medicaid. And that's a process, but we'll get to that in the next series. And two people that I had worked at a hospital, so I knew some aides, and they were able to sign on with our program and be the person that would come in from like 8 to 11. And then there were other people that came in from like 11 to 3. Now, these were people that I didn't know ahead of time. And the independent waiver linked up with an agency. So we just had whoever the agency would bring in. We had issues where I would work and my 11 to 3 wouldn't show up. So I would need to leave because he really couldn't be alone for all those hours. So that's just an example of how caregivers make or break your life. If they're not reliable, your whole life turns upside down. We did have some issues with people. Eventually, I stopped working, and then I was his everything 24/7. He wasn't vented yet at that point. So for, I would say, 8 months, it was just me. And then he went on a vent, so we needed nurses. So at that point, you need skilled care, and we went with an agency with Bayada nurses, and they would come in and do most of his care. We had 56 hours a week, so I had to decide: do I want them at night, I could sleep, or do I want them during the day? Initially, I had a nurse, and then I trained a nursing student during the day because it was cheaper to have a nursing student than an agency nurse. So I kind of did that for a while. And then eventually I was the nighttime caregiver. So 12 hours from 9 p to 9 a, I was on duty because I felt like it was to use my nursing hours during the day. My kids were young when he went on. They were 8 and 10. So I needed to be able to be a mom and leave the house, take them to baseball and things like that. So it was best to have the care during the day, but it meant that I didn't sleep through the night for years. So again, and nothing is ever set in stone. So we try one way, but then I'm like, well, I can't leave the house. I can't do anything with my kids. Let's switch it up. So that's the one thing that I think is important. Nothing is really set in stone. I mean, if something isn't working, then change it up and try and do something different. And the more resources that you have, the more possibilities you're going to come up with yourself and for success. Again, another reason to be a part of a community that can share their experiences and talk about the different possibilities. So,
Wow.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for taking us through that timeline. I know we'll hear more about that as the webinars evolve over the next 2. And could you just touch on who was it that was kind of helping you navigate in terms of when I need more, or how to shift things around or whatnot? Are there any people in particular that were helpful in that area?
As far as navigating, I mean, I had specific resources. A lot of it depended on help with payment, right? So social workers really helped me to find the resources. Area Agency on Aging helped me get the independent waiver. There was a lady at the Bucks County Veterans Office who helped me fill out my VA stuff. And the social workers are really great resources. There was a lady through the ALS Association that was super helpful as well. So I found out that most of my resources I got through the social workers.
Wonderful. That's great. Really great point. Thank you for sharing that, because of course our next webinar will be about how to get the care, right? And all these, we will have a social worker on with us during that webinar as well. So hopefully that'll help shed some light in terms of how do I navigate this?
Yes.
How do I find the resources, right?
Yep.
That's great. Thank you so much. All right. So then just, thinking about who the caregivers are, and as we move forward from there, right. So the big questions, right? When do we start care? Which so many people will say to us when we're at the clinic. And then also too, I know that oftentimes we are the ones suggesting to families that it might be time to consider. So this part of the conversation also, I think, and Lisa, I'd love to hear your input on this as well, is this involves the person living with the disease, right? And they might be at a totally different starting point than maybe the family member, right? Maybe it's evident to the family member that, wow, I'm exhausted and overwhelmed. And that person living with the illness may not be ready to have someone else besides you or their loved one, right? So when to start care? I'll just touch on some points, and then I'll bring you in, Lisa, just in terms of some questions specifically. So sooner than later. Absolutely. Why do I say that? So sooner than later is encouraged, if at all possible, because there often is a preparation time to find care, to get support, to figure out maybe even what's needed. So we always encourage sooner than later, if that is at all possible. And, we will often start having these conversations sooner than later in the clinics. If we try to check in with our families as well, those loved ones that come to the clinic visit with the person, and try to get a sense from everyone involved how things are going. Then this other piece in terms of moving from self-sufficiency to community sufficiency, which you might hear sometimes that that can be quite a process, I have found, for those that are, for really the whole family unit sometimes, wanting to be able to maintain some sense of normalcy. And this idea that once you start adding people into the home, it can shift that dramatically. And then also just the sense of self-independence, and that ALS is definitely a disease that needs community, just like this als.community. It is not a disease that, no one lives with ALS in a silo, in a bubble, and that it affects everyone. So we do really try to encourage that sense while being able to maintain some dignity for the person themselves. So that can be a tough balance. We'll certainly have more discussions about these as well. Then this sense of, like you mentioned,
Sorry,
Lisa.
Mary.
Oh, yes.
Can I read a question from the chat?
Oh, yes.
At what point do you need round-the-clock care? How far into the disease does this become a must?
Well, I certainly have my input, my thoughts on that. And so, Jeff, would you like us to just kind of address those questions now, if we're going to get to them in a bit, or how would you like us to handle that?
Why don't we go ahead and address it now, and then we'll move on from there.
Okay, super. Lisa, do you want to take that, or?
Round the clock care. So, it's usually a pretty significant decline in function, right, with caregiver burden. And I think it can be one or both people that decide it's time for round the clock care. As a caregiver, I might be the one that says, look, I cannot do this all day, every day. It could, it's probably, I don't know if you feel like it's more the caregiver that says it's time for clock care, or do you think it's more the PALS that determines that?
Well,
Combination of both.
yeah, I mean, I think this is a really appropriate question for where we are right now, right? Just in terms of this, when to bring care in. So definitely to that question, I mean, I think we always look here that it's mentioned physical exertion, safety issues, time constraints, all these things. So regarding round the clock care, it's certainly, we would want to look at what are the needs, what are the medical and the physical needs. Sometimes medical needs require that. It's certainly, like Lisa, if somebody's on a ventilator and with a tracheostomy, with a breathing tube, then they are required to have somebody with them 24/7.
Right.
So that
within earshot.
exactly, yes.
Yeah, like when somebody's on a vent,
Yeah.
you have to be able to hear what's going on because you're listening for beeps, you're listening for disconnect. So 24/7 means like literally within earshot.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And then if the medical needs aren't necessarily kind of the, top impetus for that or need or reason for 24/7 care, then like Lisa, you were expressing, we look at, what's the kind of overall picture and burden in terms of, and when I say burden, not necessarily, let me use the word actually workload rather than burden, because I don't want it to be a negative connotation.
Right.
So what is the workload? Right? What is the workload in terms of the person that is caring for, or the, the needs of that person living with the disease? And, is it safe for them to be there at nighttime by themselves? So there are, several considerations in terms of care and considering 24/7 care. We have some people that don't necessarily have medical needs throughout the night, yet there is a level of anxiety that they experience coming into the nighttime where, it's helpful just to have some sort of a companion there. So they know that, someone else is there at nighttime. And sometimes that can happen during the day too, if their loved one is maybe going to work. So looking at kind of all of the variables. And Jeff, I know that was kind of the second part of the question. What was the first part of the question?
How far into the disease does this become a must?
Wow, so that I have found to be very variable as well. And that really depends on the whole system, everyone that's involved. We have some people some loved ones of people living with ALS that just know that they are not caretakers, or that they want to remain the loved one and not be involved in any of those more kind of technical or medical things that Lisa was describing. And for those people, they start, pretty early on. As far as a must, I would definitely say, and Lisa, you can chime in too, I would definitely say from a standpoint of safety, that is absolutely, like if somebody's falling a lot, or they're not able to get enough nutrition in because there's nobody there to get food for them or feed them. If there's real kind of medical and safety concerns, we would say, yes, it's an absolute must. If the other thing to consider is that, certainly if somebody lives alone, we need to be talking about that early. And then two, in circumstances where, it's becoming more evident that the care person and the loved one is becoming more overwhelmed and exasperated, which could then lend itself to whether it be emotional or physical safety concerns, then that would potentially require a must as well, I think.
And I found that in conversation, say somebody is really not safe to be on their feet and they can't get up and get to the bathroom and they can't get on a commode, but a lot of people are like, well, what if we don't have to go to the bathroom during the night? and they start to like play the roulette kind of thing, like, well, they don't want to pay for somebody to be there for many hours when they only need help periodically. But the problem is, it could happen at any moment. And if you're not safe on your feet, you need somebody there. So convincing people to get more hours of care, they're like, well, they're just going to sit around and do nothing. I hear that a lot. But like anytime this person needs to get up, they have to have help. And you don't know when that's going to be. You can't time when you're going to go to the bathroom. Like nobody really knows. So if you're that much of a safety risk, they do have to have somebody there.
If you don't mind me jumping in real quick, um, communication between spouses, this is all tough stuff, and there has to be open channels of communication. My wife also had a slow progressing form like Lisa's husband did. And so we were fortunate in that we could adjust to the changes in a way that's different than your typical ALS patient, but it's tough stuff and you have to work hard, as with marriage, but on communication and just trying to make sure that you're on the same page and expressing what your concerns are and moving forward with consent, which is it's a lot more challenging than just saying it. It's a lot of work to get everybody on the same page.
Mm-hmm.
That is a huge piece. Yes, yes, yes. And yeah, that certainly does lead us just to consider, you know, kind of all the challenges to getting care, which of course the kind of practical pieces of getting care we'll talk about in our second. But for today's and probably our third or final one, we'll really talk about these challenges that you spoke to directly, Jeff. Getting people on the same page. And I think from the get-go, if there's something, sometimes when families will say to me, how can we do this well? Once they've kind of had the time to wrap their brain around things, how can we do this well? And I always tell people, I certainly am not the expert because, I do not know firsthand what it's like, and I hope I never pretend to live actually with the disease. What I've learned from the families that I've worked with is that open communication and continual communication is probably one of the greatest things that has served people. And for a lot of us humans, communication doesn't come so easily. So it can be a really new, it can be a really new idea and practice for people to have to learn now in the midst of having to deal with this. So
yeah, and actually to that point, Jim and I, we had a good marriage. We loved each other dearly. The change of roles was difficult, and we did get counseling. I think it's important to get like marriage counseling to talk about how the roles are changing. Because one of the things that would happen would be like, I think he was hiding, he gonna let me know that he felt weaker, that he was declining, but I saw it. And I didn't want to talk about it because like, I don't want to acknowledge the fact that, declining. And so it was like this elephant in the room, and going to marriage counseling was just a way to open up some dialogue, and it was helpful. And you don't have to have a failing marriage to get marriage counseling. This is a tough thing, and having a moderator to kind of help you talk about such a difficult thing. I mean, talk about a lot of emotional stuff going on. So trying to protect each other out of love, creates a communication problem.
Huge kudos to you. Oh my goodness, yes. This is one of those major life stressors that we as therapists always ask people about. Yes,
Mhm.
absolutely. So huge kudos. Would, yes, encourage anyone to do something such as that, right?
Mhm.
Earlier the better. That's tremendous. Wow.
Absolutely.
So yeah, certainly just thinking about, readiness. I mean, just like you were saying, Jeff, people being on the same page, trying to get people on the same page. This also the sense of kind of independence, wanting to hold on to independence, and how the disease itself kind of invites everyone involved to this concept of like interdependence, where it really takes a village. It takes more people now to remain, living as optimally as possible. Yes. And, changes to lifestyle. These are all things to consider. That certainly, privacy in the house, and then how to maneuver these things. Right now, there's going to be new people coming in. Are there some, items that I have to lock up? How can I, kind of, um, somewhat desensitize my or wean my loved one off of relying on me so much, and be willing to accept outside help. Change in routine, of course. Now, once you invite more people into your house, where getting out of bed, maybe the aide can't come, maybe the aide has to come at 9 a.m. and you weren't ready to start your day until 10 typically, right? So all these things to take into consideration. And then just access, of course, where we will speak more in depth about this next time, being able to access care and how to find care. There's always staffing issues like Lisa, you described. Certainly finances, the challenges. I swear that this is one of the biggest gaps in our healthcare system, is the onus and the financial, much of this, the financial burden relies on the family. And it is not often covered by insurance, of course, unless you're a veteran or, somebody qualifies for Medicaid. So we'll talk about some resources next time too. And then also, of course, just the time essence, and how much time that, with the disease of ALS, everyone here knows that, the time is ever changing. And like we've said multiple times, you can't really plan for things. And just taking all these pieces into consideration, So Lisa, do you want to speak to any of this? Was there something like your readiness and Jim's readiness? Were you guys on the same page with that? And Jeff, if you want to chime in as well, I mean.
I think, the thing that like I said, led initially to us reaching out for more help. He had a hard time getting calories in, and his hand didn't really allow him to open containers and things like that. So even though he could walk, he was not able to really use his hands. And as much as I would set things up before I went for work, like I would give him a shower and get him dressed and everything, and then set everything up before I left for work. But he started to have more difficulty with physically getting the food in. And then, of course, when it started falling and things like that was a big deal, with the need to get help in. And I think that, he was, he was a Green Beret, and he was used to like being able to, he was physically fit, and he was able to figure things out and stay independent for a really long time. And I kind of like, I don't know, I called him MacGyver. He was like always able to figure stuff out. But I do think that I let him do stuff longer than I really should have. And it killed me as a therapist, because I'm like, dude, you're not safe. Like, and yet he's like, I can do this. And so there was like a struggle between giving him, that independence and respect, and then realizing like, look, like it's not safe anymore. It's hard when that happens. And then as far as used to somebody in your home. So, when I were talking the other day, like I'm not a super private person, and so I can imagine how somebody who's very private is going to handle having help in their home. It's very difficult. One of the things, I mean, you need to decide how you want it to look. Like for me, having somebody in my home, I felt like it was more natural to kind of treat them as an extension of our family. Just because that's just the way I was comfortable doing it, rather than like treating you like just some worker, you need to go sit out there until we need you. I mean, that's not me. And like, even though my husband couldn't eat anymore, we had dinners every night where, you know, I'm feeding the kids, Dad, you're going to be in here and we're going to have like family dinner night, you know, and a lot of nights the nurse would be in there with us, and you know, again, but you need to figure out what your boundaries are. For some people, their boundaries are going to be like, look, this is our family time, and this is, you know, we don't want to have the nurse in there. And that you really need to be able to communicate what you want and what you need. So if you strictly want to have time that's family time, we'll call you when we need you, then you do that. If, you know, I think that you really need to figure out what you want, and to be able to tell your caregivers how you want to do it. You know, don't let things happen that eat away at you. You know, if you're annoyed with somebody being in your space, then you need to speak up and be like, okay, you know what? You know, when you do this, I'm going to have you sit over here and whatever. So I think it's keeping an open dialogue and really taking control of like what you want the situation to look like. You know, and with kids, you know, I wanted my kids to feel comfortable with the nurses. I didn't want them to feel like strangers because they were little. And so I encouraged them to talk with the nurses and build a relationship. And they had wonderful relationships with our nurses. Again, that's a personal thing.
It is.
And then the one other thing I wanted to add, everybody is different, but I never let my kids be a caregiver for my husband. They were not born yet when my husband got this disease. Okay, so he first started showing symptoms in 98. My first son was born in 99. So they never knew their dad being 100% physically capable. I wanted my kids to still have a childhood. I didn't want it to all be about ALS. So I had to make sure that they still got to do kid stuff and still had a childhood. And it wasn't all about ALS. And that was very, very hard. But my decision was, I don't want my kids doing any caregiving. I want them to have a child-father relationship. So again, some people are different. Some kids maybe want to be a caregiver and they want to jump in and they want to help. But, you know, I came under a little scrutiny, I think, by, you know, I kind of heard some comments, I think, from some of the nurses, like, well, you know, why don't the kids help? And I'm like, they don't need to. And it's okay. So whatever your decision is, it's your decision.
Lisa, you mentioned relationships. So our very first caregiver, and this is now going back 30 years, I was just in town for my mom's birthday, and Shelby's been gone for 10 years. So you really develop you can develop very close bonds with people. And with her and our circumstances, it was a matter of knowing when it was too much for her that somebody else had to start filling in. And so again, because Shelby was slow progressing, these answers revealed themselves slowly. I feel for people that have a more typical progression and it's all being thrown at you all at once. You know, just from the conversation involving children, these are all very, very difficult decisions. Of course, we're sorry that they have to be made, and we're working towards eliminating the need for that by eliminating the disease, but it is really tough stuff in terms of managing your spouse and your family. But there's no one answer. It's up to your own creativity. I will say that there was a recommendation in the chat in regards to when we were talking about spousal communication. Marshall Rosenberg's teachings on the practice of nonviolent communication, which
it's lovely. Yeah, great recommendation. Thank you for whomever put that in the chat. That's a great recommendation. Yes. Jeff, I did have a question for you as well. Just in terms of, navigating this whole piece also that and I realized that it was a slower course. Did you use your resources like Lisa was expressing to the resources around like various social workers, or did you guys kind of navigate this on your own? Finding
we
care.
Use resources. We had excellent care from the Greater Philadelphia ALS Association, which is now ALS United Mid-Atlantic, another great Philadelphia nonprofit for people with ALS. And so they pointed us to the resources, both for finding caregivers and financial resources. We also benefited from the Pennsylvania Independence Waiver Program. So it was really the local ALS Association.
Wonderful. Great. And I think that's really important just in terms of that both of you bring up, just in terms of, families are dealing with so much already with the disease and now needing care and all these things, who to turn to help navigate through this. And, whether it be counselors, but certainly, if people are connected to a multidisciplinary center for care, there's, potentially a social worker there or the clinic nurse or something. And then also the local organizations that you have too, the social workers. So certainly use those resources and if you don't have them and you don't know who to turn to, I am speaking for Jeff, but I'm sure that you can, reach out. You can reach out to me. I mean, anything but we would help people find those resources to help you. Yeah,
absolutely. But being a part of an ALS chapter, is so crucial. I mean, we were a part of a clinic and multidisciplinary. You meet with the doctor, the nurse, all the therapists, and the speech, and just they always had the answers. It's a stressful day to go to a clinic. It's long and awful, especially when you have like an hour and a half ride to get there. But always very helpful, and they are totally the experts in this disease. And I found like primary care and local hospitals really didn't have the knowledge for the disease. So being in a community hospital was not really great sometimes because they totally didn't understand the disease because they just haven't seen it much. So making sure you're really part of a clinic and an organization really going to make a difference.
Yeah, and certainly for anybody that's on here today or that listens after the fact to the recording, definitely, I mean, I commend anyone, that's maybe a loved one or a caregiver or somebody living with the disease that avails yourself to webinars such as this, to conversations and communities such as this, to just connect with others, find out what other resources are out there, find out, what other people are doing. And that really is the best way. I mean, it all starts with, like Jeff, you had said, a conversation, right? This idea of it's interesting because Lisa and I, we had this conversation the other day just about this sense of independence moving towards interdependence, that it really does take a village. There are people that do want to help. So even starting the conversation, if you think that it might be time or things are getting a little bit, precarious, or if it's clearly evident and you just need more help, then definitely have those conversations, reach out to those people that are around, and just to start the conversation in terms of what is the need, what are all the needs, and then what are all the resources? And that's where it begins, just with that conversation like this one. So, not that I'm closing, but just so people know, our second webinar, which I believe is maybe in 2 weeks.
2 weeks.
Yeah. Also on a Monday at 12. So that one will entail, yes, just kind of the nuts and bolts of how to get care, how to find care. And then, the intention for the third webinar in this series will be kind of an question answer dialogue conversation with somebody living with the disease, and also with Lisa, just in terms of talking more in depth about some of the things that we touched on today, how to get over the obstacles, when, where, how, why, and all kind of the emotional pieces, the communication pieces, all those things, just so we can help potentially better support everyone involved.
Mm-hmm. And I think, in hindsight, I probably should have gotten help a little sooner. I think that I was very stoic and was like, no, I've got this, I can do it. And, as if, I don't know, as if it was bad if I had help. And honestly, we're just human. And I think that I probably should have accepted more help along the way. That's one thing I would do differently, rather than to try and do everything myself. I think, I had a lot of that I had to fill, and being able to delegate a little more, I think, helped me.
Thank you for sharing that. I think that's a really important piece to consider. And I realize it's we have a few minutes left here, 8 minutes or so. Is that right, Jeff? If we want to, I don't know if we're opening the floor for
8 minutes. Yep.
Any questions or whatnot? Questions, thoughts, comments from anyone?
Well, I'll comment on what Lisa just said, which is I do my share of Monday morning quarterbacking now. What I would have done differently. Don't be like us. Just do the best you can and reach all the resources that you can to get different opinions, but there is no one way. You just do your best, and whatever will be, as long as you did your best, then you can look back and say, I did all I could. It's tough stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Stuff, yes.
Yeah, and accepting help. We had friends that, I had one in particular that was like, oh, we want to do a fundraiser for you, and I just kept, no, we're good, and they just didn't listen to me anymore. They're like, so once on the event, they're like, we're doing this. God, because they raise money and it has to pay for care and set up a team and be a little breathing room to set up a team. So that was huge. And then community support. I worked in a hospital and I had family leave, and I had to miss a lot of work. And little did I know that people were taking their paid time off to me. So when I took some family leave, and how am I still getting paid?
So great.
I mean, think of that. How much love is that out of a community? A large hospital and people getting their paid time off. How great, So that's another that people can give.
Really does.
And I know that at the time I would have been like, what? But it was amazing. So this is just ways that your community can step in and help you.
It's a difficult circumstance. Everyone recognizes it, and you just have to leave room to let the love in, because people really do want to help.
Mm-hmm.
But I was just the caregiver. I can't even imagine from Shelby, but you have to learn to give up self-sufficiency and just swallow your pride and recognize that these are circumstances that were totally beyond our control and are not easy. And that's the kind of thing where your neighbors, friends, people that don't even know you that well want to step up and help. So let them. And it's easier said than done, but hear me now, believe me later. How's that? There is one more question. How does someone learn to become a caregiver? Is there something like training that people can look for?
A great question. That's a really great question. Yeah. So we do have some resources. Lisa, I don't know if you want to speak to that just because you train.
Well, tell me about the resource that there are resources online of how to be a caregiver. So why don't you talk about that? Because I know that you guys have also set that up a little bit, and there's some stuff online.
So there is an organization, and I have to say, I mean, probably it is a resource that we give out to pretty much all of our families, actually. And it is youralsguide.com, which is a really wonderful, very informative, very comprehensive guide to not only living with the disease on a day-to-day basis, but it also has a whole caregiving section and does some training around the particular kind of physical tasks. Yep, and there it is. Somebody just put it in the chat. Galen, thank you so much. Yes. So there's the website. I do have to say it is, yeah, and actually the two people that facilitate that and that put the guide together, one was a caregiver, and the other was a physical therapist or a social worker. I think Sarah could answer that, but yeah, so they're really wonderful. So that tends to be a really great resource because there is a whole caregiving section, and part of it is made for professional caregivers as well, because we realize that that is one of the biggest challenges, is being able, so great, I have a physical body, and now they don't know how to do anything. So there's another kind of workload in terms of being able to train people. God forbid there's turnover.
Right. And some ALS clinics offer, or organizations offer caregiver training days. The other thing that I really want you to know about is that physical therapy, occupational therapy, their job is to not just treat the person with ALS, but it's to train the caregivers. So if your one is starting to have some functional deficits, and you're needing to help them, and you want specific guides on how to do it correctly, you can get home physical therapy and occupational therapy, and they will come out to your home, do an assessment, and do specific training specifically. Like that is I think people don't realize is available, and insurance covers that. So the thing is, they should be coming in when there's changes in function. So it's not a one done. So, earlier on when suddenly I need to know how to hold on to him when he's walking, how am I going to do this safely? How do I get him in and out of a shower? I'm not quite sure. I don't know what shower chair to get. This is all physical therapy and occupational therapy that is covered by insurance. So ask your doctor. You need a physician prescription. Right. So you have to ask your primary. So your primary doctor will write a prescription. You get them to come out. Sometimes you don't need a nurse, but sometimes it's nurse, PT, OT, and speech. And at the very least, you can have PT and OT come out if you don't need a nurse or whatever. But I feel very strongly, I'm a PT, and I know that I think there's a weakness out there where a lot of PTs haven't worked with ALS before. So it does get a little challenging, but at the very least, I call it reverse rehab. So like say somebody has a stroke and they start low level, and then the therapist's job is to get them higher and higher and higher and need less equipment. Well, ALS is reverse rehab. So you start out, you don't need much help, but then you start to need more and more. And a physical therapist should be able to make recommendations, and OT, at every stage of the disease. So the goal is just to make sure that the patient's safe and that the caregiver is safe, because you learn body mechanics to save your back and make sure that you're safe. So absolutely use that resource.
That's actually something that's very common when you go to your multidisciplinary center. that hopefully the PT and the OT there, a lot of times from our center, they will collaborate with the home therapists on your behalf. So then individually, they all can put a plan together for you there in your house. So definitely your multidisciplinary care center can help with that too, to coordinate those services.
Yes, use the resource.
So we are at time, and I just wanted to say to Mary and Lisa, thank you so much. So much of the challenge here with caregiving is where to start. And I think that this 1 hour recording will be very useful for people who are asking themselves that question. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
We'll have you back in 2 weeks. Can't wait. And we appreciate you very much. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Everybody take good care.